In the week following the creation of the memory box, a new and profound sense of peace settled over Amy's heart. The project, which had started as a mission to heal her daughter, had ended up being a powerful act of healing for herself. Sharing the stories, laughing at the happy memories, and crying the sad tears had been a catharsis, a lancing of a wound that had been festering for 4 long years. Ty's memory was no longer just a source of pain, it was a source of strength, a beautiful, integral part of her story. And with that newfound peace came a new, terrifying clarity. She could no longer hide from the other question that was looming over her future: Nathan. Their reconciliation had been a temporary truce, a bandage on a complicated wound, but the underlying issue remained. He had made his feelings clear, and she was still a tangled mess of confusion. She felt a deep, genuine affection for him. He was her friend, her confidant, the one person who had been a steady, quiet presence through the darkest days of her life. She owed him her gratitude. She owed him her honesty. But what did she owe his heart? And what did she owe her own? The guilt of her kiss was still a quiet, constant companion, a reminder that she was standing at a crossroads, and she could not stand there forever. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she could not find the answer in the busy, loving, and sometimes suffocating embrace of her family. She needed to be alone, truly alone. She needed the one thing that had always been her greatest sanctuary, the one place where her mind could finally quiet down enough to hear the whisper of her own heart, the wilderness. She made her decision one crisp, clear morning. She found her Grandpa Jack in the barn, his hands methodically mending a bridle.
Grandpa, I need to get away for a couple of days, just for a night. I was thinking of riding up to the old line shack by Mirror Lake, just me and Spartan.
The line shack was a small, rustic cabin deep in the foothills, a place she and Ty had often used as a base for long trail rides, a secret, sacred spot that was theirs alone. Jack looked up, his perceptive, knowing eyes taking in the quiet, determined resolve on her face. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He saw the weariness in her eyes, the weight of the impossible questions she was carrying. He just nodded, his support absolute and unconditional.
That sounds like a fine idea. The solitude will do you good. You just make sure you pack warm. The nights are getting cold.
I will. Thank you, Grandpa.
She left a happy and secure Lindy in the capable, loving hands of her great-grandfather and Lisa, her heart feeling a small, selfish pang of guilt for leaving, but also a profound, desperate need for the escape. She packed her saddlebags with a quiet, efficient focus, her movements a familiar, comforting ritual. A bedroll, a small pot for coffee, a bag of apples for Spartan. It was a journey into the wild, but it was also a journey inward. As she tacked up Spartan, the big, gentle bay horse who had been her constant, silent partner through every joy and every sorrow of her life, she felt a sense of calm settle over her for the first time in days. Out there, in the vast, silent beauty of the mountains, there would be no expectations, no worried glances, no unspoken questions. There would only be the wind, the sky, and the truth. She swung herself up into the saddle, the worn leather a familiar, comforting embrace. She took one last look at the bustling, loving, and complicated world of the Heartland Ranch, at the home she loved more than anything in the world. Then, she turned Spartan's head towards the high, distant peaks of the Rocky Mountains, and with a gentle squeeze of her legs, she set off into the wilderness, a lone rider on a quest for an answer she wasn't even sure she was ready to find. The sound of Amy's horse trailer faded into the distance, leaving a quiet, temporary void at the Heartland Ranch. Jack stood on the porch, watching the dust settle on the long gravel driveway, a thoughtful, slightly worried expression on his face. He knew this trip was something Amy needed to do, a necessary pilgrimage into her own heart. But he also knew the kind of ghosts that lived in those quiet, beautiful, and lonely places in the mountains. He just hoped she would find the answers she was looking for. With Amy gone for the day and night, a different, more masculine rhythm settled over the ranch. Jack and Lisa had Lindy under their capable, loving watch, and the day's work was a straightforward, uncomplicated list of chores. The first item on that list was a stretch of fence line in the north pasture that had been leaning for weeks, a job Jack had been saving for a quiet afternoon. He was in his workshop, gathering the necessary tools, a post-hole digger, a tamping bar, and a fresh roll of wire when the familiar rumble of Nathan's truck interrupted the quiet. Nathan pulled up, a friendly, easy smile on his face as he got out. Since his reconciliation with Amy, a new, subtle confidence had taken root in his demeanor. The awkward, hesitant man who had been walking on eggshells was gone, replaced by someone who felt, once again, like he belonged.
Morning, Jack. Just passing by on my way to check my herd up on the ridge. Figured I'd stop in, see if you needed a hand with anything today.
The offer was neighborly, friendly, and entirely normal. But to Jack, who had been observing the subtle shifts in the emotional landscape of his family with a keen, watchful eye, it felt a little different today, a little too eager.
Well, that's good of you to offer, Nathan. I was just about to head out and fix that leaning fence on the north end.
Say no more. Many hands make light work. Let me grab my gloves. I can have that done for you in no time.
Before Jack could protest or even respond, Nathan had retrieved his own work gloves from his truck and was already heading towards the pasture with a purposeful, energetic stride. Jack was left standing by his workshop, a strange, unsettled feeling beginning to brew in his gut. It was a kind offer, a helpful offer, but it also felt a bit like a takeover. It was a job Jack had planned to do, his own work on his own ranch. He decided to let it go, chalking his own unease up to a grandfather's overprotectiveness. He went about his other chores, but an hour later he wandered out to the north pasture. He saw Nathan, his shirt off in the warm sun, working with a focused, efficient energy. He had not just fixed the leaning posts, he had taken it upon himself to re-stretch the wire on the entire line, a much bigger job than was necessary. He was working on Jack's fence with a proprietary air, as if it were his own. It was a subtle thing, a nuance of intention, but Jack, a man who had spent his entire life reading the subtle language of horses and men, saw it clearly. Nathan wasn't just helping, he was trying to prove his value to establish his place. The feeling of unease deepened later that afternoon. Jack was in the main barn checking on the troubled mare that Amy had been working with before she left. The horse was still nervous, but Amy's patient, quiet work had clearly made progress. She was calmer, more willing to be approached. As Jack was refilling the mare's water trough, Nathan appeared in the doorway of the stall.
She's a beautiful animal. How's Amy's progress with her?
Slow and steady, the way it should be. Amy figures it such as a trust issue, not aggression.
Nathan nodded, his gaze analytical as he studied the horse. He walked into the stall, his movements confident. The mare, sensing a new, more assertive energy, immediately tensed, her ears flicking back and forth nervously.
You know, with a high-strung horse like this, sometimes the best thing is to establish a firm line right from the start. Let her know who's in charge. I had a gelding with a similar issue a few years back. A week of solid assertive groundwork and he was a different horse.
The words were spoken with the easy confidence of an experienced rancher, but they were also a direct, though perhaps unintentional, contradiction of Amy's entire philosophy. It was unsolicited advice, a subtle undermining of Amy's methods in her own barn, on her own client's horse. Jack's back stiffened. He turned slowly, his expression now completely unreadable, his voice a low, quiet rumble that was colder than the concrete floor.
Amy's got her own way of doing things. Seems to have worked out pretty well for her so far.
The gentle but firm rebuke landed with a quiet finality. Nathan had the good grace to look slightly chagrined, realizing he had overstepped.
Right, of course, just a thought.
He backed out of the stall, the friendly, easy atmosphere now gone, replaced by a new, awkward tension. He made his excuses and left a few minutes later, leaving Jack alone in the quiet of the barn. Jack stood there for a long time, his hand resting on the nervous mare's neck, his mind a whirl of troubling thoughts. He wasn't a man who was prone to suspicion, he was a man who believed in the inherent goodness of people. And he knew, on a logical level, that Nathan was a good man. He was helpful, he was kind, and he clearly cared for Amy. But Jack's instincts, the ones that had been honed by a lifetime of reading the subtle, unspoken cues of predators and prey, were telling him something different. They were telling him that Nathan's helpfulness was beginning to look a lot like a quiet, patient, and methodical siege. He wasn't just trying to be a part of Amy's life, he was trying to take it over. And as the protective, primal love of a grandfather for his granddaughter rose in his chest, he knew with a quiet, cold certainty that it was something he would have to watch very, very closely. The trail to Mirror Lake was a journey back in time. Amy rode Spartan at a slow, steady pace, letting the familiar rhythm of the horse's gait and the vast, profound silence of the wilderness work their slow, healing magic. She pushed deeper into the foothills, leaving the rolling, pastoral landscape of the ranch behind, and entered a more rugged, wild world. The air grew thinner, cooler, and the trail began to climb, winding through dense forests of ancient towering pine and spruce trees. This was a landscape that was saturated with memories of Tai. Every curve in the trail, every sun-drenched clearing, every glimpse of a distant, snow-capped peak was a landmark in the geography of their love. She passed the spot where he had taught her how to track a deer, his voice a low, excited murmur as he pointed out the subtle signs in the earth. She rode through the meadow where they had once been caught in a sudden, violent hailstorm, forced to take shelter under a thick canopy of pine boughs, their laughter echoing in the small, protected space as the ice hammered down around them. The memories were not painful today. For the first time, they were not ghosts that haunted her, but gentle, welcome companions. The work she had done with Lindy on the memory box had been a profound release. By giving voice to the happy stories, she had stripped the past of its power to wound her. Ty's memory was no longer a heavy, sorrowful burden she had to carry. It was a part of her, a beautiful, indelible chapter in her story, and she could finally look back on it with a sense of peace and a deep, quiet gratitude. She arrived at the lake in the late afternoon, the sun beginning its slow, golden descent behind the jagged western peaks. The scene was breathtaking, a perfect, pristine jewel of natural beauty. The lake itself was a sheet of flawless turquoise glass, perfectly mirroring the deep blue of the sky and the dark, stoic ring of pine trees that surrounded it. At the far end of the lake, nestled in a small, sheltered cove, was the line shack. It was a tiny, rustic, and impossibly romantic cabin, built a century ago by a lonely cowboy, and it had been her and Ty's secret sanctuary. She unsaddled Spartan, letting him drink from the cool, clear water of the lake before setting about the familiar, comforting rituals of making camp. She gathered firewood, her movements efficient and sure, and soon a small, cheerful campfire was crackling to life on the stony shore, its smoke a thin, gray ribbon spiraling up into the vast, empty sky. As darkness fell, the world seemed to shrink to the small, warm, and intimate circle of her campfire. The stars began to appear, not one by one, but in a sudden, brilliant explosion, a dense, glittering canopy of light that was so bright it felt like she could reach out and touch it. The silence was absolute, a profound and holy quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant, lonely cry of a loon from across the lake. She sat on a smooth, flat rock, a tin mug of hot tea warming her hands, and she finally allowed herself to do the one thing she had come here to do. She began to talk to him.
Hey, Ty.
Her voice was a low, soft murmur, a sound that was immediately swallowed by the vast, silent wilderness. It felt strange at first, the act of speaking to an empty space, but as she continued, it began to feel natural, necessary.
It's so beautiful up here tonight. You always said this was your favorite place in the whole world, the one place your head would finally get quiet.
She smiled, a small, sad, and deeply loving smile.
My head hasn't been very quiet lately. It's been a mess.
She took a deep breath, the confession, spoken aloud to the stars, a profound and necessary release.
I kissed him, Ty. Nathan. I kissed him. And I don't know why. I mean, I do. He's a good man. He's been so kind to me, so patient. And in that moment, it just happened. And a part of it felt nice. It felt like coming back to life. But another part of me felt like I was betraying you, like I was breaking a promise I didn't even know I had made.
She stared into the dancing flames of the fire, her heart laid bare in the quiet solitude.
I'm so confused. I love you. I will always, always love you. You were the great love of my life. But you're gone, and I'm still here, and I'm so, so lonely. And a part of me, a part I'm so ashamed of, is just tired of being strong. Tired of being the sad, brave widow from Heartland.
A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek.
And I don't know what to do. I don't know what you would want me to do. Am I supposed to be alone forever? Or am I supposed to move on? And if I do, does that mean I'm forgetting you?
The questions, the ones that had been a chaotic, tormenting storm in her mind for weeks, were finally spoken aloud. She didn't expect an answer, of course. She just needed to ask. She just needed to give voice to the impossible, tangled knot of her own heart. She sat there for a long time, the fire slowly dying down to a bed of glowing embers, the stars wheeling across the sky above her. And in the profound, holy silence of the mountain night, in the absence of an answer, she began to find her own. She wasn't betraying him. She was just living. She was a woman, still young, with a life still to be lived, a heart still capable of feeling, and the love she felt for Ty, a love that was as vast and as constant as the starry sky above her, was not a cage. It was a foundation. It was the bedrock on which the rest of her life, whatever that may be, would be built. The confusion hadn't vanished. The choice was still hers to make. But for the first time, she gave herself permission to make it, free from the heavy, crushing weight of guilt. She was not a widow, defined by her loss. She was Amy Fleming, and her story was not over yet. While Amy was finding a fragile, lonely peace under the vast, silent canopy of the Alberta sky, hundreds of miles to the south, a different kind of fire was being lit. In the rugged, sprawling high country of Montana, the man known as Benjamin was sitting by his own campfire, a solitary figure in a vast, sleeping landscape. He was on an overnight cattle drive, a necessary part of the ranch's seasonal rhythm, and the herd was settled for the night, their dark shapes a quiet, breathing presence in the darkness beyond the firelight. The air was thin and cold, and the sky, if possible, was even more brilliant, more packed with stars than the one Amy was looking at. He was not at peace. His mind, since his strange, powerful dream a week ago, had been a restless, agitated thing. The memory of the dream, the feeling of a small hand in his, the scent of hay and horses, the brilliant, laughing smile of a woman with golden hair had not faded. It had become a constant, low-grade fever in his soul, a deep, aching sense of a profound and fundamental wrongness in his own life. The name Amy Fleming, the name he had heard from the other cowboys, was now inextricably linked to the images from his dream. It was a key, but it was a key he didn't know how to turn. He had tried to find more information. A few days ago, on a rare afternoon off, he had hitched a ride into the small, dusty town that served as the ranch's closest outpost of civilization. He had walked into the town's tiny one-room library and, with a fumbling, unfamiliar touch, had used one of their old, slow computers to search the name. Amy Fleming, Heartland. The search results had been a confusing, overwhelming flood of information. He saw pictures of a beautiful, sprawling ranch, a place that looked both completely foreign and achingly familiar. He saw articles about her miraculous work with horses, headlines that called her a miracle worker, a horse whisperer. And he had seen pictures of her. Dozens of them. And with every image, the sense of recognition, the feeling of a deep, profound, and utterly impossible connection had grown stronger. But it was one image, from an old local newspaper article, that had stopped his heart. It was a grainy, black-and-white photograph from years ago. It showed a younger Amy, her hair longer, her smile just as brilliant, standing proudly next to a beautiful bay horse. And beside her, with his arms slung casually around her shoulders, was a young man with his own face. He had stared at the screen, at the smiling, confident, and completely unfamiliar face of his younger self, and a wave of vertigo had washed over him. It was like looking at a twin brother he never knew he had. The experience had been too much. A sharp, blinding pain had exploded behind his eyes, a violent, neurological rejection of a truth his conscious mind could not accept. He had stumbled out of the library, his head pounding, the single, impossible image burned onto the back of his eyelids. Now sitting by the campfire, he stared into the dancing, hypnotic flames, the image of his own smiling, younger face taunting him from the depths of his memory. Who was that man? Who was that woman? What was this place called Heartland? The questions were a relentless, tormenting cycle. "You're a long way away tonight, Benjamin." The voice of the old cowboy Hank pulled him from his reverie. Hank was the trail boss, a man with eyes that had seen a lifetime of sunrises and sunsets, a man who missed very little. He came and sat on a log on the other side of the fire, a tin mug of coffee in his hand.
Just thinking.
Seems to be a lot of that going around with you lately. Ever since you started asking about that horse lady from up north. Benjamin didn't reply. Hank took a slow, noisy sip of his coffee. You know, it sets a funny thing about the past. You can try and outrun it, but it sets always there, right behind you, just waiting for you to get tired. The old man's words, full of a simple, folksy wisdom, seemed to hit a little too close to home. It was in that moment of quiet, philosophical reflection that it happened. Staring into the shifting, glowing embers of the fire, his mind a turbulent sea of fragmented dreams, half-remembered images, and the stories he had heard, a single, powerful wave finally crested and broke. It was a memory. It was not a dream. It was not a fragment. It was a complete, crystal-clear, and overwhelmingly real moment, replaying in his mind with a sensory detail that was so powerful it knocked the breath out of him. He was standing in a sun-drenched field. The air smelled of clover and warm horses, and she was there. Amy Fleming. She was walking towards him, her blonde hair a brilliant, golden halo in the afternoon sun. She was smiling. That same, beautiful, life-altering smile from his dream, and he could hear his own voice, a voice that was both his and not his, a voice that was younger, lighter, and full of a deep, uncomplicated love, saying her name. Amy. The experience was so powerful, so absolute, it was like a physical blow. He let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, his hand flying to his chest as if to hold his own heart in place. The tin mug of coffee slipped from his other hand, spilling into the dirt by his boots. "Whoa there, son. You all right? You look like you just saw a ghost." Ty, because in that moment he was no longer Benjamin, looked up at the old cowboy, his eyes wide with a wild, terrified, and brilliant light. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move. A single, perfect key forged in the fire of this one, reclaimed memory, had just been inserted into the long-rusted lock of his past. The name, the face, and the feeling, they had all converged into a single, undeniable truth. He knew her, and she knew him. His past was not a locked room. It was a home, and he had just for the first time in 4 long, agonizing years, remembered the front door. Here is the continuation with the 5th and final part of Chapter 6, correctly set in Heartland, Alberta, Canada. The stars wheeled across the vast, silent sky, indifferent witnesses to the 2 profound, solitary awakenings that were happening hundreds of miles apart. At Mirror Lake, Amy's fire slowly burned down to a bed of soft, glowing embers, the warmth a comforting presence as she finally, after a long, soul-searching night, drifted into a deep and peaceful sleep under the watchful gaze of the Rocky Mountains. In Montana, the man who was no longer just Benjamin lay in his bedroll, the single, brilliant, and overwhelming memory of Amy's smiling face playing on a loop behind his eyelids, a miraculous, torturous, and beautiful fragment of a life he now knew he had lost. He did not sleep again. He just lay there, waiting for the dawn, a man reborn into a world of questions. The first light of morning arrived in the high country as a pale, ethereal wash of pink and gold, painting the eastern sky. The air was thin, cold, and achingly clear. Amy woke feeling a sense of peace and clarity she hadn't felt in 4 long years. The heavy, suffocating blanket of her grief and confusion had been lifted in the quiet solitude of the wilderness. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that her love for Ty was not a cage. It was a foundation. She could honor his memory, cherish the beautiful life they had built together, and still allow her own heart the possibility of a new future, whatever that might look like. The choice was still hers to make, but it was no longer a source of torment. It was just a choice. She broke camp with a new, quiet efficiency, her movements full of a gentle, unburdened purpose. The ride back to Heartland was not a retreat from the wilderness, but a return to her life, a journey home to the family she loved and the future she was now finally ready to face. Hundreds of miles to the south, a different kind of dawn was breaking. The man who was now in his own fractured mind, both Benjamin and a ghost named Ty, woke with the same single perfect image that had seared itself into his brain the night before. Amy. The memory was still there, a brilliant, unwavering light in the fog of his amnesia. It was not a dream. It was real. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew with an absolute soul-deep certainty that his life had just been given a new singular purpose. He was no longer a man adrift. He was a man on a mission. He went about his morning duties on the cattle drive with a new, strange energy that did not go unnoticed by the other cowboys. The quiet, melancholic man was gone, replaced by someone who was still quiet, but now radiated a tense, almost electric sense of purpose. He found Hank by the chuck wagon, his face a mask of grim resolve.
Hank, I need to ask you something.
Shoot.
That ranch you were talking about, Heartland, where is it exactly?
Hank looked at him, his gaze sharp and perceptive. He had seen the strange, profound change that had come over the younger man by the fire last night. It's such a long way from here, son. North, across the border in Alberta. Why do you ask? Benjamin didn't answer the question directly. He just looked out at the distant, hazy outline of the mountains to the north, a look of such profound, desperate longing in his eyes that the old cowboy didn't need an answer. The episode ends on these two powerful parallel fronts, two souls who have been separated by a universe of trauma and time, now unknowingly moving towards each other, their separate journeys of healing and discovery about to converge. The final shot is Amy, riding Spartan over a familiar ridge, the beautiful, sprawling landscape of the Heartland Ranch spread out before her, her face serene, peaceful, and full of a quiet, hopeful resolve. And in a stark cross-faded final image, we see the man known as Benjamin, back at the main ranch in Montana, standing in front of a faded map of North America that is pinned to the wall of the bunkhouse. His finger is tracing a path, a long, desperate line from the dusty plains of Montana, north across the border, into the heart of the Alberta foothills. His face is a mask of pure, unwavering determination. He doesn't know what he will find at the end of that line. But he knows with every fiber of his being that he has to go. His new mission had begun.